What's this invisible war we are in right now? That terminology is being used quite frequently lately by our leadership, and it's being referred to as an invisible war or that we have an invisible enemy that we're currently fighting. Does it mean exactly what everyone thinks it means, or is there more to the story? Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're going to talk about this invisible war we are currently fighting, and why our leadership keeps using that terminology. Are they trying to warn us, or are they trying to explain to us what's actually happening behind the scenes that none of us can see with the naked eye? This is a situation right now where things are escalating quickly, and I'm not sure if you're aware of that or not, but things are starting to change from what the narrative originally was just a couple weeks ago even. And we're starting to see a rapid escalation towards the demonization of another country who happen to be at fault for the current crisis that we're in. There's a lot of information coming out revolving that, and this whole narrative about having an invisible enemy or a secret war or something along those lines might not exactly mean what we all thought it meant originally, okay? So, really quickly, if you do enjoy topics about SHTF and you're worried about keeping up with what's going on right now in the world, hit that subscribe button below just so we can keep conversating and keep the message going. So I'm starting to get concerned because our leadership, and especially our current president, seem to have a good way of telling the public what's going on without saying it directly to us, without saying exactly what they mean all the time. There's a lot of hidden innuendo in all of the speech and all of the dialect that we hear from our leadership. And it might be on purpose, or it could just be Freudian slips, but either way, I feel that there is a message being put out there that we all need to take very seriously. Things have started to escalate. And the reason I say that is because we have been on the brink of a situation with the country of China for a long time now. So China has become a superpower on the world stage, and they've started to spread their territory, whether or not anyone in those territories agree with their aggression or not. And it started a long time ago. Our interests have started to become conflicted because their manufacturing ability and their ability to produce their own GDP at a huge rate of success has started to surpass our ability as an economic superpower. Hence why we started having these trade wars, right? So the trade wars started. And at the beginning of that situation, a lot of people were worried about how that would affect the world economy, how that would affect our relationship with China, whether or not that might put us on track for some kind of a war. However, here we are now, actually fighting an invisible war. And that is something that every one of us needs to consider. Because if you've been watching the headlines and been watching the current events that are going on right now, not only did we find that the current crisis we are in is not due to a flying mammal being consumed, it's also not due to an accident that happened inside of a country that wasn't able to contain the situation. What we're finding out, and what we all speculated on months ago, which is starting to become the truth, is that everything we're dealing with and everything we're having to adapt to right now is thanks to something developed inside of a laboratory. And if you didn't think that this whole situation was man-made from the beginning, then I hope you're starting to change your mind now. And when I say man-made, I'm not just referring to the biological aspect of what's happening. I'm also referring to the current crisis we're in economically and the current global stage itself and how it's being set. These things don't generally happen on accident. We have to be very vigilant right now as those who are trying to be of a prepared mindset and people who want to move forward and prepare correctly for the threats that may or may not arise during this situation. You have to be able to keep your mind open, and you have to be able to keep informed about what's going on, and not just what you're hearing from the leadership or the mainstream media. You have to use many alternative sources and try to find the best narrative you can by putting the pieces together. And I honestly will tell you, I do believe that there has been not just Freudian slip or innuendos coming from our leadership, but I do think that there has been a lot of messaging that they are putting out there that is there to literally warn those of us who are aware of what's going on in the world today, okay? There's been terminology being used, invisible war, okay? What can an invisible war be? Well, originally the term of invisible war was supposed to be related to an ideological war, a spiritual war, right? And many of us, many of us in this community feel that there is a spiritual war going on every day as we speak. But this invisible war is not being necessarily labeled as a spiritual war. What else can an invisible war be? Well, there's many things. One of those things can be cyber warfare. Cyber warfare is an invisible act of war that nobody sees but does see the results of, okay? So cyber warfare could easily be referred to as an invisible war. However, that's unlikely at this moment, although if there is any cyber warfare happening, it's happening right beneath our noses, okay? So this invisible war, could it be in relation to something like a coup d'etat? A coup is generally done behind the scenes. It's not often done in front of everybody's eyes. It's not often done in front of the public. Things are done behind the scenes to where people lose power and people are stripped of their authority without anyone realizing what's happening. And then eventually the big presentation of this is the new way is unfolded to everyone. This is a possibility. If you're not aware of some of the events going on recently, what I'll say is that our executive branch has made some changes recently. Things have not necessarily gone the way they originally narrated, and some things that many of the keen-eyed out there have noticed have changed that are strange and something to watch out for. One of those things is the fact that the presidential seal and the presidential flag have disappeared from many of the press conferences. Okay? Now, there's many reasons for this, people are saying. There's a lot of explanations. And it is true that if you want to go down that rabbit hole, there's a lot of theories that can go very sideways when it comes to this scenario. However, right now, we're being told we're in an invisible war with an invisible enemy. And I don't honestly believe that that is only related to the biological threat at hand. I think it is related to the fact that we are actually in some kind of a proxy conflict with the nation of China because of the current scenario. If you think that an economic collapse on the world stage that's being blamed by a singular entity due to what's being now called a man-made incident won't change the course of the planet towards some kind of a conflict, then you haven't studied history. Why has the narrative suddenly changed? This invisible war is now being targeted towards a different entity than its original intended target. And suddenly, it went from being an accidental situation to a man-made laboratorical situation. Keep in mind, words mean a lot. And the things we're hearing from our leadership, the things we're hearing from those who are in charge, actually matter. These are not just words they're putting out there to fill space, okay? One of the things that caught me off guard, that everyone here should be aware of, that made me start thinking a little bit harder about what was being said and what kind of actions were being taken, was that the president, during one of his addresses, used the term artificially induced in relation to the current crisis we are in. I don't believe that was just filler. I think that that term was used purposefully to let us know that what is happening right now is artificially induced. Whether that's in relation to the biological issue, whether that's in relation to the economic collapse we're all currently experiencing and will escalate, I guarantee you that. These are things you need to pay attention to. The words artificially induced weren't just used on accident. Artificially induced has a lot of meanings. And if our current situation was artificially induced from a nation that's considered problematic when it comes to our foreign affairs, do you think that that could possibly be considered an act of invisible war? Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are about what's happening right now. There has been news reports that not only suddenly has everyone changed their mind and decided that yes, this all started in a laboratory and was man-made and possibly artificially induced, But we're also hearing headlines now that P.S. China has been conducting secret nuclear tests during this whole situation. While the world was looking somewhere else, secret nuclear tests were being had over here. Were they really had? Did those really happen? Or is this just furthering the narrative of the invisible war that we're currently fighting? I have a video from a long time ago. It was my first attempts at making a narrator style video, I will call it. And in the video, I talked about my top 5 SHTF events to cause Teotihuacan, the end of the world as we know it. In that video, I prioritized those events 5 to 1, with number 1 being the most likely event to cause SHTF. I will tell you that one of those items on the list was, of course, pandemic. Okay? But the number 1 item on that list was economic collapse. Also, a worldwide conflict was on that list. The reason economic collapse was listed as number 1, in my opinion, was because economic collapse will lead to most of the other SHTF scenarios that we could possibly experience. Minus that of per se natural disaster, economic collapse will more than likely lead to warfare. Economic collapse can be caused by or even cause a pandemic due to worsening conditions and quality of life. So, that being said, we're now in an economic collapse. If you haven't understood that from the beginning of March, if you haven't understood that since people started shutting down business sectors, since entire states were being put on stay-at-home orders, since over 11 million people, I believe we're almost at 22 million people now, have filed for unemployment. If you don't think we're in an economic collapse now, then there's no warning signs that are going to change your mind about where we're headed. And the last time we had a huge economic collapse, the thing that remedied it was warfare, a worldwide war. So, keep in mind, this invisible war we're fighting doesn't necessarily mean the biological aspect of our current scenario. This invisible war is between an enemy that we're aware of, and that enemy is suddenly being demonized on an escalation that we haven't seen before. Suddenly, the biological aspect is not from eating a flying mammal. Suddenly, after months of denial, actually it was artificially induced from a laboratory. Listen to the words that are coming from the leadership. They don't just say them because they need to fill space. Artificially induced are very carefully chosen words. And now, suddenly the narrative is going to what everyone a month ago that was saying it, being called conspiracy theorists, are suddenly correct. And guess what? All that does is validate why we need to punish China for the current scenario. And by punish, where does that go? It starts with sanctions. It starts with money. And money turns into conflict, as it always has. So please be prepared. Please stock food. Get so much food, because the food is going to run out. We're going to have a shortage, and it's going to get very expensive. Yes, we live in a country of wealth, and yes, we are lucky to have the agricultural production that we have. But get what you can now. It's not about the food fully running out. It's about the fact that right now, it's affordable. And the longer you wait, the more money you'll have to spend to get the same amount of food. So do the best you can now. And make sure you have security put away. Because the more this escalation occurs and the greater the conflict becomes imminent, then you will have to be there to protect you and your family. And you have to do the best you can with what you have when that time comes, because you won't probably be able to get anything else at that point. So, invisible war, tell me in the comments below. What do you think it means? Because I don't think they're talking about ideological spiritual warfare at this point. And I don't think they're talking about cyber warfare, although I think that's happening every single day no matter what. I think we're talking about something a little bit bigger here. If you don't believe me, just start reading the headlines and go ahead and refer them to a month ago when the whole thing was the opposite of what they're saying now. Keep your mind open and keep preparing. That's going to be it for Magic Prep.